what we need for the team. You know, the other issues that we mentioned here were having confused feelings about sexuality and difficulty expressing feelings in general, including anger. And in terms of eating to self-medicate, feelings like rage, or feeling, you know, the clip we had of the man whose wife struggling with her problem. In this particular clip, it was a problem with alcohol addiction.
And so his addiction, and often the field would talk about consumption of food as a compulsive behavior or an addiction.
Okay.
And it can be just as deadly as alcohol abuse.
Okay. But somehow we say we see it as a little more benign, more like you need to cut back a little bit.
Yeah.
Where for her we'd say you need to be abstinent. Okay.
And often the people who I see, men who will come in to deal with their weight issues, may be referred by their primary care physician. They come and say, I have a weight issue, I can't keep the weight off. I've been on this diet merry-go-round and going up and down, losing the weight. And some of these people have lost thousands of pounds almost, and regained it, and lost it, regained it. And what I see what they're struggling with is this sense of, how can I now manage it? It's more than just dieting.
Right.
So a man needs to be able to feel safe enough to go in and to get a sense, how am I using my food to self-medicate?
Right. And
to understand that.
And I like the word manage. We're going to take a quick break. Okay?
Sounds
and then
good.
we will come back and learn some more tips for managing.
Okay.
In fact, we have a special treat today. We have Abby Layton Campagnoni, who is the recent winner of the National Council on Alcoholism and Drug Addiction Poetry Contest that was run through their newspaper, The New Times. She has been gracious enough to be willing to read her most recent poem, which does have to do with food and addiction. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Abby.
This poem is about a man I know, a man who has sobriety now from his eating disorder. He is discovering, as so many of us are, recovering from addiction, how to love himself into wholeness one day at a time. This poem is for you, Ed. You are an inspiration. The me I am. Me as a child, I learned the lore that wards away the wild, the bolted door to the unknown, unnamed, unwanted trials. I grew to worship what worshiped me, what inspired confidence, dispelled mystery. Food, 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 singing in all my viscera. With my teeth and tongue, every battle I won. Unseen, I built a wall to stand between me, little, and the big all. Me as a young person, out on my own, no longer a child, not yet full grown, I learned to lean on this wall of food, to seek self-esteem from anything chewed, weeping in the arms of my lover, food, keeping me big, away from all little you. Me as a grown adult, over 300 twice, then down, last up to 440 pounds. From the crumbling fortress of my flesh, turrets torn, battle worn, self-will's riot, now quiet, forlorn. Peering out, I see a person in my life who means a lot to me. Beyond self-effacement, I uncover human displacement of my food lover. Oh, I was still addicted to my food, and I would pay my due, but I could feel now I was in love, and this was new. Yet we were both prisoners of addiction, me to food, now only pain, my partner, whom I loved, addicted to crack cocaine. This was my bottom, this my end. By learning to love, I became my own best friend. Nearly homeless on welfare, grace visited me. I sought help and found sobriety. Opened my heart, tumbling apart, the wall in me huge, to the infinity inside us all.
Welcome back. That was lovely, wasn't it?
It was.
I bet you have a particular reason to be struck with that.
Yes.
It was particularly touching in terms of hearing this person's struggle, you know, up and down to the place where, you know, reaching a bottom where, you know, in recovery we talk about our bottom is where we can no longer not see that this is a problem. We have to do something about it. And we were talking before in terms of managing and what brings people into treatment. And you mentioned that primary care physicians are often the person that may instigate that crisis that gets people into treatment, or even significant others. I wanted to take a look at the next few descriptors we have of compulsive eaters, because I think they relate to relationships. They have difficulty in intimate relationships, a distorted body image, and are perfectionistic. Okay, any of those seem familiar?
Well, they are. You know, for many of the men who I see in my practice and who I've experienced throughout my life, just like women struggle with a distorted body image, especially those that would be anorexic or bulimic, because when they look at themselves in the mirror, they often perceive that I'm too fat, even though they might actually be in an appropriate body weight. But I like to point out that's the minority of men. Majority of men have problems actually with being overweight and consuming larger amounts of food in an abnormal way often, and then keeping that on for such a long period of time begins to damage their body. And in that same process, what it damages is, and this is from the addiction field, we look at knowing that you're consuming a substance, in this case would be food, and it has a negative effect upon your life, from health to relationships, maybe financially. You're out spending money on food that you might throw up, or food that isn't necessary, eating dozens of donuts at a time, or other ways, to maybe even some legal problem. I've seen people who are shoplifting food for their compulsion and got busted for that. And so the food becomes a substance that interferes with one's life, and yet they know this and they continue. So we can look at it like as an addiction. But the key in therapy and managing is we want the man to understand what's the compulsion below all these behaviors that I keep acting out in these ways when I know it impacts how I feel about myself. How it impacts how my children relate to me if I ate up all their desserts for their lunches. You know, so it does impact relationship. It impacts their ability. If a man often has a sense of not feeling good in their body, it'll probably impact how they are sexually with their partner. So just like women who have all these same issues, men do too. We just don't talk about it.
Okay. But it's certainly something that men can relate to at a lot of different levels.
Correct.
Now, it was interesting that the other characteristic mentioned was perfectionistic, and I'm sure, I know from a female perspective, it's very hard at one level to be a perfectionist and then to see imperfection when you look in the mirror. And, you know, in your experience with men in treatment, I mean, how are they able to reconcile that, where I may be the president, I may be a CEO of a large company, I may be extremely successful, and yet I'm not able to feel competent and control what I'm putting in my mouth?
Yeah, that impacts one's self-worth. Like, I can manage all this money, or I can manage this department or this company, but I can't manage how I handle my food. So it directly impacts one's self-worth and one's shame about oneself. And again, what we would be working with is trying to get that man who sees that I'm very successful, I make things work, and yet this one part of my life, I can't get it to work. It's to see the pain that my brothers feel, these other men, because they can't manage this part of their life is sad.
Plus, it's so visible.
Yes.
I mean, that's what I think is so striking about it, that, you know, this is a very clear evidence that maybe I am not completely in control all the time. Let's take a look at our next list of characteristics. Psychological factors, and again, this is from also Feeding the Empty Heart. We have three, but we'll start with self-esteem, which maybe for some men may be fairly fragile, may have unrealistic expectations of themselves. In fact, probably the self-critical aspect that you were talking about before when you mentioned that sometimes that it does impact their self-worth, and that maybe men's self-talk can be sort of, this isn't a secret. People seem to know. Yeah.
True. And when we look at the issues of self-esteem, it does impact them. But most of the history of this is often in the childhood. And so when we get the man to begin to look back to understand the root of their compulsive eating and their inability to manage their health, to manage their food, and to have this sense of powerlessness over their life, over their food, when they manage often other areas. Now, often that's the exceptional man who manages everything else but doesn't manage their food. Most men often will have problems in other areas they're not managing.
Oh, okay.
It may, and this is often how many men come into treatment, because they may have entered for their alcoholism, their drug addiction, their compulsive spending, and as they've dealt with those compulsive behaviors or addictions, they find that they're eating more now.
Okay.
And as they begin to understand the relationship of themselves to food, they go back and often find that food was their first addiction. But at some level, it didn't work anymore, so they developed other ways of faster ways of altering their awareness of themselves or their pain and numbing themselves out. But as they found out that these other addictions no longer worked, and they got into treatment, and they've stopped those compulsions, often the food addiction would resurface, or the self-medicating. And so I often will have people come in and see me in their practice, or they see other therapists because they're already in recovery, and they begin to feel like, I thought I had this beat, but now my food's out of control.
Here it is again. What kind of issues, just in general, might a man have struggled with in his childhood history or his younger history that can contribute to this?
Often sexual abuse. And this is something that we often wouldn't think of as men as being sexually abused. But men, too, are sexually abused, just like women. And because it's a violation of their bodies, depends upon the type of the abuse. And for a child, often one of the few things they have to nurture them, if it's an abusive home or a home in which sexual abuse is occurring, is food becomes the nurturing source.
That's very true.
And you don't have to interact with a parent or a sibling about feeling good. You just have to eat those bananas or those sugared cereals or the candy bars to feel a shifting in how you feel.
And also, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I know for women, you know, one of the things we do is the compulsive eating can create kind of a wall of protection. And let's say you're raised in a physically abusive environment. I mean, one of the ways to handle that is to create some distance between you and the physical abuser. And I'm sure that must be true for men as well. Let's take a look at our next characteristic. Okay. Feelings. Let's see, we've got powerlessness, depression, anger, fear, hypersensitive to criticism, or even the word numb. And I think you used that a moment ago, that idea of numbing out. Can you tell me more about that?
Food is a great number.
Okay.
Especially if you take it in large enough volumes, it's going to numb you out. It may actually create some pain, so you're numbed out to whatever the feelings were. Or it depends upon the food you might take in, such as high sugar foods are going to alter your blood chemistry and cause a different brain response, and you get numbed out.
And how does food treat depression?
Well, food often adds to the depression.
Okay.
And so sometimes we're going to look at somebody who may have an eating disorder. Was the depression there first, or did they have an eating disorder that then they started to become depressed?
Right.
So part of the therapeutic process is to look at the origin of the depression.
Say which came first. We have about 30 seconds, but I want to go to that final characteristic, which we mentioned, which was on relationships. That often these men may be highly dependent or superficial, be secretive, difficulty with trust or poor boundaries, maybe even being controlling and judgmental. And basically, since we're going to need to sum up, it sounds like men who probably do keep to themselves and keep their own counsel, and so may not be openly expressing what's going on inside of them. So seeing someone like you can actually, in many ways, even save someone's life physically, because it allows them to say what they need to say instead of continuing to push it down with food.
And I would encourage all men to seek help. We don't have to do it by ourselves anymore.
Absolutely. Thank you for being with me tonight. Thank you for being with us. Stay tuned. Over the next few weeks, we'll explore fatherhood, shyness, and codependency. I'm Mary Crocker Cook. Good night.